I'm not a psychologist, I'm just a psychology enthusiast, but for this particular episode, I'm using my own personal experience, okay? Hi guys, so welcome back to the season 3 premiere of Lily's Little Life Corner. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about maladaptive daydreaming because you guys voted that you wanted to see more psychology-focused themes. So for this week, we're going to be talking about maladaptive daydreaming, and we're going to be talking about everything that it is and everything that it does to you and how you can step out of that if that is something that you struggle with. As always, I have my notes here on the side, so if you hear any paper rustling, that is what that is. If you hear any, that's just the cardboard of my notebook. I also want to give a trigger warning to those of you who are struggling with staying grounded in reality. I do not think this is the episode for you, and I think you should skip this episode and just listen to next week's episode or the week after that, because next week we're also going to be talking about pregnancy and just giving birth and stuff like that. So if that's not your cup of tea either, then the week after that, hopefully will be your cup of tea. But I truly, if you are struggling with escapism or with not being grounded in reality, please do not watch this episode. This episode is not for you. However, if you know someone other than yourself who is struggling with escapism or not being grounded in reality, feel free to watch this and learn more about maladaptive daydreaming and what that can lead to. Please take my trigger warnings seriously, okay? Thank you. As always, I'm wearing my merch linked in the description if you guys are interested in checking that out. Anyway, let's get into it. So, according to the Cleveland Clinic, maladaptive daydreaming is, quote, a behavior where a person spends an excessive amount of time daydreaming, often becoming immersed in their imagination. They go on to say, quote, for some people, this behavior disrupts work, hobbies, or friendships and relationships. So that is what maladaptive daydreaming is. It's basically self-explanatory. It's what it sounds like. It is daydreaming that is not regular daydreaming. Because here's the thing. Everybody daydreams. Everybody has a vivid imagination. Everybody has some kind of imagination. Daydreaming is very normal and very common. However, when that stops being common and when that stops being normal is when it disrupts your hobbies, your work, your relationships with other people. That is when it stops being normal, and that's when it turns into maladaptive daydreaming. This term is relatively new. It was coined in 2002, and there are very few studies, and the only study that was done in Israel. So take that with, a grain of salt, but from personal experience, I can say that maladaptive daydreaming is a very real thing that has affected me personally, and I caution you guys against going down the maladaptive daydreaming rabbit hole, as in participating, doing the maladaptive daydreaming. You can research it, there's not a ton of research on it, so the rabbit hole on the research is not that deep, but the rabbit hole on actually maladaptive daydreaming and going down that path is very dangerous, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to get into that. According to both Harvard Health and Cleveland Clinic, maladaptive daydreaming typically affects those who are already struggling with mental illness. So anybody with depression, anybody with ADHD, autism, OCD, any kind of those kinds of mental illness disorders or diagnoses where escapism is kind of a symptom are prone to maladaptive daydreaming. So I think any dissociative disorders as well, those people are also prone to maladaptive daydreaming. Now, like I mentioned, the only study that was ever done on maladaptive daydreaming was done in Israel, and it wasn't even a study on maladaptive daydreaming itself. It was a study on the comorbidity of maladaptive daydreaming. What that means is that they were looking for other disorders that affect maladaptive daydreaming. So it's what I said. They were looking into people with ADHD, autism, OCD, depression, anxiety, dissociative disorders, and seeing how maladaptive daydreaming affected them and if there was in fact a link between those disorders and maladaptive daydreaming. So there currently, as it stands, I don't think. From what my research tells me, there hasn't been a study done on maladaptive daydreaming itself, if that makes sense. Also, because the study was only conducted on Israeli citizens, or, occupied Palestine citizens, but not the episode for that, I guess. Because it was only done on one specific type of population from one specific place, that study does not really correlate to other countries. And this matters because when a study is only done on one specific kind of population, that study cannot then be applied to people living in other populations. Even if both people were struggling with, ADHD, say for example, the study cannot be correctly and should not be applied to somebody living in a different country, in a different population, with different societal expectations, different societal norms, etc., etc. So again, like I said, take this with a grain of salt, because maladaptive daydreaming is very, very new and has very little studies done on it. And when I say very, very new, 2002, but there hasn't been very many studies done on it within the past 2 decades that it's been coined as a term. So take it with a grain of salt. But like I said, I can vouch for its existence because I struggled with maladaptive daydreaming, and it really, like I said, leads you down a very dangerous path. But anyway, I wanted to steal from the Cleveland Clinic article and let you guys know some questions, or I think this is actually from Harvard Health. I'll link both in the show notes and in the description as always. Questions to ask yourself if you feel like you are struggling with maladaptive daydreaming. So, first question is, how often do you forget where you are when you daydream? So this happened to me where I would be sometimes in school, sometimes, like eating, and I would completely fall back into my daydreaming and then come back in and be like, wait, oh, I have a taco in my hand. I should eat, right? Next question, how strong is your urge to return to your daydream once it ends? Next question, how much does daydreaming interfere with your ability to complete work or basic chores? Again, I struggled with this. So those are the questions to ask yourself to decide whether or not you do struggle with maladaptive daydreaming. I would say also, how often are you just sitting there doing nothing and just staring off into space, daydreaming and thinking about characters that are not real, whether that be characters that you made for yourself, like I did, or whether that be characters that exist in fiction, that exist in books, movies, TV, manga, anime, and imagining them with you or you with them. That's also a big sign that you are maladaptive daydreaming, is if you are not about to sleep and you're thinking up scenarios, right? I think everybody does that. I think that's normal. But if you're sitting on the couch and you're just staring off into the distance for hours at a time sometimes, and you're just thinking of you in that fictional universe, you in that universe that you created for yourself, that is also a big sign that you are maladaptive daydreaming. Okay, so now let's talk about this maladaptive daydreaming to shifting pipeline. That is what gave me that spiritual psychosis. And again, I do want to reiterate, this is very, very important. I do not want to be the reason that you fall into psychosis yourself, okay? If you struggle with escapism or staying grounded in reality, stop watching. Please, stop watching. Do something else, okay? Watch something else, scroll a little bit down on your YouTube homepage, click something else, exit out of Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever it is that you are watching me on, leave. This is not for you, okay? Very, very important. Don't get mad at me for using this disclaimer, because this disclaimer is actually very important, okay? So let's talk about what shifting is. Shifting, or reality shifting, is this idea where you are able to shift your conscious mind into another reality or universe. So think of it as the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The multiverse is what they call it. In the multiverse, there, especially, I don't know if you guys watched Loki, the TV show, they do a good job at explaining this idea of different realities existing with each other. The idea basically goes that for every decision you take, there is a reality with the decision that you did not take. I like to think of these ideas of different realities existing as the saying, when one door closes, another door opens for you. Essentially, think like if you applied for a job and you were rejected and that door closed for you, another door opened for you, right? Which is maybe you now have free time to do your hobbies. But for another version of you, somewhere out there in the universe, they got accepted into the job. And so then they don't have space for hobbies. They don't have time for hobbies. So there's a version of you that exists making money off of your hobbies, and there's a version of you that exists making money off of a job. I hope I explained it well, but essentially just think of the multiverse from Marvel. Okay, there's a Loki that died when Thanos snapped his neck, but then there's a reality where Loki is alive and escaped the Avengers' custody in 2014 and then found out what the multiverse was. Okay, that is essentially like it's you but in multiple different realities is basically what that is. So the idea of reality shifting is that you can take your consciousness from this reality and put it into another reality where you are somebody else. I think this idea started a little bit more grounded in reality. So the idea first started based off of this idea that there were multiple yous, okay? And that you could shift into a reality where you were the you that you wanted to be. The you that was successful, the you that was, with the love of their life, whatever success may look like to you. That was the idea, the idea that you could meditate yourself into the future, into a future where you were successful, and motivate yourself to achieve that reality and to achieve that future that you wanted to achieve. However, during the pandemic, it really, really, really went down a weird path, and that is the path that I got sucked into. So I'm saying weird path, but just know I was part of this weird path, okay? So I'm not judging necessarily. I am judging a little bit, but I'm also judging myself when I'm judging, okay? So don't feel too bad if this applies to you. But anyway, during the pandemic, because everybody was experiencing lockdown and because everybody was stuck in their homes, a lot of people went down this escapism route where they were like, well, I'm just gonna imagine that we're not in this reality where everybody is stuck during lockdown and there's a deadly pandemic going around and people don't want to vaccinate themselves and people don't want to mask. I'm just gonna imagine that I am in my favorite anime, One Piece. I think that's what, I don't watch anime, but people were like, I'm just gonna imagine myself in One Piece or in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's another really popular one. And then the idea shifted, no pun intended, from reality shifting into a reality where you are the you that is successful into shifting into a reality where you are part of a fictional universe. So again, that's what I mean by it started as being a little bit more grounded in reality and went down a really weird path. Whether you may believe the grounded in reality version or not, it started just as like a meditative exercise that you could do to motivate yourself to be the best version of yourself that you could be. Okay, so that's why I also use the term spiritual psychosis when referring to my struggles with maladaptive daydreaming, is because this idea of shifting is based in spirituality and spiritual practices, such as, meditative practices and like lucid daydreaming and, the idea that your soul and your consciousness are things that exist. That's why I use the term spiritual psychosis, in case you guys were curious. And also, reality shifting does tend to be really popular in these spiritual and metaphysical corners of the internet. If you find yourself in those corners of the internet, proceed with caution, because you can go down really weird rabbit holes if you're not careful. So anyway, because you had a group of people that were so lonely and isolated during the pandemic, trying to reality shift into a reality where their life would be better, not just, they were rich and successful, but they were in another fictional universe where struggles like the pandemic wasn't really a thing. Or if they did shift into a universe where struggles like the pandemic was a thing, they would shift into a universe where they were kind of leaders of that universe, and they were able to help out with the pandemic, and they were able to feel like they were doing something to help humanity. Obviously, humanity in that other universe, not this universe, but I digress. And this trend has since kind of slowed down, and you don't really hear about it too much anymore, but it was huge during the pandemic, and that is how I got sucked into it. That is how I got really, really bad. It all starts with a feeling of isolation and loneliness due to, various different things, whether that be your environment that you're growing up in. Maybe you're getting bullied at school, maybe your parents are not paying attention to you, or maybe you feel like they regret having you or something like that, right? Or it could be that you are struggling with mental illness and you're struggling with depression, anxiety, and that is what makes you feel lonely and isolated. So then you begin to daydream and imagine a better life for yourself, as one does. But you're also then getting dopamine boosts from the amazing life that you're picturing yourself in. So you kind of become addicted to daydreaming. And that is where it becomes maladaptive daydreaming, is that daydreaming is the only thing that is giving you happiness. It's the only thing that is motivating you to keep daydreaming, to keep living, to keep daydreaming. And so you begin to avoid the responsibilities that you have in your real world. And maybe this might not be noticeable for people. Maybe in your daydreams you are a straight A student, and so you are successful in school in real life, but you start to lock yourself in your room, you start to ignore your friends, you start to stop talking to your family, you become even more isolated, and it all starts becoming a cycle. Right? Kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more that you daydream, the more lonely you become. But the more lonely you become, the more that you want to daydream and pretend like you are not lonely and pretend like you are not isolated. But the more that you daydream and the more that you find yourself isolated, the more that you're kind of wanting validation or wanting a name for the thing that it is that you are experiencing. So you go online, you start to Google your symptoms, and you find maladaptive daydreaming. You find that is what you are struggling with. You find that other people are struggling with maladaptive daydreaming, and instead of going to a doctor and getting help for your maladaptive daydreaming, because low-key it is kind of embarrassing to admit to your medical professional that you were daydreaming and that is what you are struggling with. So instead of doing that, you start to find other people who are also struggling with what it is that you're struggling with, and you start to look for them kind of for help, right? You don't really want to be in this self-fulfilling isolation prophecy, but instead of finding help, you find reality shifting, and you find other people who are encouraging you to shift to another reality that is not this reality, that is not here. That is not what you are struggling with. You won't be lonely if you shift to this other reality. You won't be lonely if you shift to the Marvel universe or if you shift to a universe that you created for yourself. And that is what is dangerous. That when you find something that seems like an escape but really isn't, and is only going to further plunge you into the depths of isolation, self-hatred, self-loathing, that is what is really, really, really dangerous, and that is what I caution against. So again, if you know someone who is struggling with being grounded in reality, and if you know someone who is struggling with escapism, please keep them away from the reality shifting subreddit and from the reality shifting side of TikTok, because that is not going to do them any favors. It's only going to make them worse. That is typically how it happens. It all starts with feeling isolated and feeling like you have no one to talk to, feeling like you don't really fit in, which is also why it tends to affect people with ADHD, with OCD, people who are more prone to be lonely based off of their mental illness, right? And unfortunately, we do live in a world where kids are going to judge other kids, especially for, being weird, That is how it tends to start. At least in my experience and from what I've seen from other people who also struggled with maladaptive daydreaming. So let's talk a little bit more about my experience so that you guys can see where I'm coming from and what I personally, experience and what I can tell you guys about maladaptive daydreaming. So like I said, maladaptive daydreaming personally affected me. I started maladaptive daydreaming when I was, I want to say 5 years old. And it started just as like typical child imagination, okay? So I can't even really say that it started at 5 years old, but that's the earliest that I remember building characters in my head and imagining them in real life, if that makes sense. Also, I guess for more context before we get started, I guess I should define maladaptive daydreaming in my own terms and how I saw it. So maladaptive daydreaming for me, because it varies depending on the people. So maladaptive daydreaming for me, what I would do is I would fully dissociate from reality and I would tune out all the noise and just focus on what I was imagining. So like I said, it started in early childhood. Now again, this is early childhood where I can't really say if it was maladaptive daydreaming or if it was just regular childhood imagination. So again, that distinction is important because regular childhood imagination is not maladaptive daydreaming, but the maladaptive part for me came in when I would tune everyone out and just focus on what was at hand. And I remember my aunt called me out on it and was like, wow, you're really focused on your taco. But I wasn't focused on my taco, I was focused on my fingers. So that's what I mean by I can't really say whether it was just regular childhood imagination or whether it was maladaptive daydreaming, but that is the earliest memory of that affecting, like my daydreaming affecting my real life, if that makes sense. That is the first time that I had somebody call me out on not focusing on real life stuff because I was focusing on whatever was going on in my imagination. So that is what maladaptive daydreaming looked like to me, and that is how it affected me. And then as I got older and as I started, going to school, learning how to write, I started building out worlds in my head. And that's when I started isolating myself in my room. That's when I started being mean to my family because of what the things that I was imagining was kind of leading me down. I was imagining myself with a better life, so I grew resentment towards my real life, and that resentment turned into being mean towards my siblings, towards my parents, towards my other family members, towards even my friends at school. And I'm not gonna lie, I still struggle with maladaptive daydreaming just a little bit because it has been a part of me for so long. Almost 2 decades was what it lasted, and it lasted through my formative years, right? It lasted through puberty, it lasted through me learning how to read even. I remember, I knew how to read by the time I started, but it was, learning how to read and write those characters, I should say, that then turned into my maladaptive daydreaming world. And it started because my life was already prone to isolation, I should say. There wasn't a lot of understanding for mental illness, so when I struggled, people in my life wouldn't really know how to help me with that because they themselves were not helped with that. And so they took what their parents did to them and then did that to me, and then that pushed me into further isolation, if that makes sense. And not to get even more personal and private, but the reason why I even started maladaptive daydreaming in the first place is because I perceived my life as already lonely. So when I did start to build out my reality, my maladaptive daydreaming reality, it started with me having friends. It started with me having more people to talk to. That is what the basis of my maladaptive daydreaming was that I wanted more people to talk to. I wanted more people to listen to me, to pay attention to me, etc., right? I no longer wanted to be lonely, so I imagined a world in which I wasn't lonely. That's how it started for me, and that is why I became so addicted to it, because I really did not have anyone to talk to. And to this day, I kind of don't have anyone to talk to. But that is a conversation for another day and unrelated to maladaptive daydreaming, I've actually learned. And we're going to talk about it in a bit if we're getting personal, you know? So that's how it started for me. And because I became addicted to it, I spiraled into psychosis. And again, because I'm telling you guys how it happened this is very uncomfortable for me if you guys haven't noticed, because I'm not usually personal on my podcast. I don't usually talk about anything personal that has happened to me, and so this is very uncomfortable for me. Bear with me, okay? But I spiraled into psychosis because I found the shifting subreddit and the shifting talk side of TikTok and started trying to truly escape my reality, like truly escape the real world that I was living in, and I became ungrounded in reality. And I struggled with spiritual psychosis, specifically because shifting is more like spiritual, and we're going to talk about shifting. Don't worry about it. So you guys are going to have context for what shifting is. But I struggled with spiritual psychosis, and my family will tell you it was a struggle. It was a struggle, and this happened after I became an adult. So I had already gone to the psych ward as a teenager, and I was scared to go to the psych ward again as an adult because I didn't know if it was going to be more expensive. And I didn't, like, when you're in the psych ward as a teenager, you're with other kids, so it feels like safer, you know, it feels like you're with people who are your age. But when you go to the psych ward as an adult, you're with other adults, and adults, you know, 18 to whatever age. So I didn't want to go to the psych ward as an adult, so I had to really struggle with my spiritual psychosis on my own and figure out my spiritual psychosis on my own, which was really scary. But eventually, you know, I got out of it, and I'm going to talk about how I got out of it. But yeah, I really did struggle with not being grounded in reality, and that's why I use the term psychosis. There's a whole bunch of other things related to psychosis, but my psychosis in particular started because I was taking antidepressants from, you know, my previous visit to the psych ward, and I stopped taking antidepressants because of what my maladaptive daydreaming reality was kind of influencing on me. And I quit my antidepressants cold turkey, which is a big no-no. I was taking, I think, 3 antidepressants at that point, and I quit all of them cold turkey, which is highly unrecommended. Like, do not do that. If you want to quit your antidepressants, go to your doctor and wean off of them, okay? Do not quit cold turkey. But that is what spurred my psychosis further. That is how that happened. So yeah, I do use the term psychosis not lightly. I'm not saying like, I was delulu and I struggled with psychosis and I was, you know, delusional. No, like, I mean, like, I struggled with psychosis, yeah. But anyway, so that is how that happened to me, and that is why I'm saying maladaptive daydreaming is a very, very dangerous pipeline, and it can absolutely remove you from reality and put you in an entirely different world. And if I hadn't run into the people that I ran into, I would not be here with you guys today talking about this, because I would probably be in the psych ward. Like, that is how bad that was, okay? For context, I believe obviously in more spiritual things. I believe in ghosts. If you guys are on my YouTube, I made a live stream about ghost adventures, and I talked a little bit about my belief in ghosts. I was a tarot reader during the pandemic. I was a tarot reader on Reddit, and I got paid for doing readings for people. I have a bunch of tarot cards still. So I obviously found reality shifting through my interest in tarot cards and through my interest in divination and the paranormal. So that's what I mean by you have to be really careful when you're navigating these corners of the internet. But what happened to me was that I found spiritual talk is what they call it, where there's, tarot readers on TikTok giving you a tarot reading, there's other creators on TikTok telling you about witchcraft, there's other creators on TikTok telling you about reality shifting, and the more that you go into it, the more that you find kind of unhinged stuff, especially back during the pandemic when communities were just barely starting and the algorithm had a harder time distinguishing what was unhinged versus what was more hinged. And again, whether you believe in spirituality or not, you might be like, well, tarot readers, they're unhinged as well, but you guys have to understand, like, it's different, okay? It's levels of unhinged, okay? So tarot readers are more grounded in reality. Most of them. Some of them are not. Most of them are grounded in reality, but the algorithm had a hard time deciding which tarot readers to show you and whether you were the kind to be unhinged and fall down reality shifting rabbit holes, fall down conservative right-wing pipeline rabbit holes, or whether you were just a newbie interested in tarot cards because you bought your first deck and you were trying to figure out the meanings of the cards, right? Because this community had just barely started, it was a pandemic, etc., etc. You guys get what I'm saying. Okay, so I found the reality shifting corners of the internet, and because I was so isolated, so lonely, did not have friends, and wanted friends, it's called scripting. It's where you write down what your life is going to look like in the universe that you are shifting to. And this kind of prevents you from dying in that universe. So I was, scripting out my life where I had a ton of friends. This is so sad. And I became really resentful of this life where I did not have friends. And I became really rude towards my family members and people in my life who were trying to support me. But what also happened was, because I was on that kind of unhinged side of the spiritual side of TikTok, I also got shown people who were very into like fresh living and, you just have to eat your fruits and vegetables, and any mental illness that you have is going to be gone, and you just have to trust in the universe. You just have to trust that the universe has your back and that the universe is going to take care of you. You just have to eat from Mother Earth, and you just have to, be grateful for every meal that you consume. And I'm sure you understand where this is going. I was a teenager, 19 years old, who was taking 3 different kinds of antidepressants because I had to up my dose because I was getting used to the antidepressants that I was taking. I had to take 3 different types of antidepressants, and I was falling down this rabbit hole of people saying that antidepressants were bad for you, that is not what Mother Nature intended for you, that is not what the universe intended for you. The universe intended for you to deal with your own, problems on your own, and, big pharma and starting, you see what I'm saying? You see how it started leading down that pipeline. And so I got convinced. I was already a vulnerable teenager. I was already lonely. I was already struggling with mental illness. I was already struggling with being broke. I had a job, but I also was really bad at spending money. So any money that I would get, I would spend it. So now let's talk about how I got out of it, and hopefully I can help you get out of maladaptive daydreaming if you are somebody who struggles with that. Although you should not be here, you should not be watching this episode, but let's talk about solutions, okay? Since you're already here, let's talk about solutions. So what happened to me was that I was lucky enough to run into somebody who scared me straight. I was lucky enough to run into somebody who I confided in with what I felt and what I was struggling with and what I was, thinking of doing. I confided in them and I told them that I was thinking of shifting to another reality. I was, fully in that idea of like, I don't want to be here anymore. I hate my life here. I want to be somewhere else. I want to be somebody else. I don't want to be here anymore. So I confided in them. I told them that I was thinking of reality shifting, and they told me that if I did, it would lead to essentially me dying. It would lead to, me having suicidal ideations, which I had already struggled with. It's worth noting that even though I had struggled with those ideations before, I was at a point in my life where I did not want to die. I no longer wanted that to be the outcome of my life. I had hope for the future despite everything that was going on in my head. But what this friend told me was essentially like, if you successfully shift and you successfully shift into a reality where you have a life that is 1,000 times better than what you are currently living in, when you come back to this reality, you're going to be so depressed that it's going to lead you into those suicidal ideations. Like, it's going to lead you back into hating your life, into not having hope for the future, into not wanting to better yourself. And so I kind of took a moment to take it in because I didn't really believe it at first. I was so convinced that I had to shift. And so I kind of took it in and realized they were right. And like I said, I did not want to die. So that's what started my kind of rehabilitation process, if you will. And that's what got me into realizing that maladaptive daydreaming was doing me no favors at all. It would lead to me potentially killing myself, and I did not want that. As much as I hated my life here, I was still scared of dying, and especially because, I was spiritual and I didn't really know what came after death, right? I didn't really know I wasn't ready to know what came after death, and I knew that I wasn't ready to know what came after death, so I got scared straight, and I was like, okay, well, I have to figure something out. And I confided in my friend, I was telling them, I'm addicted to maladaptive daydreaming. Like, how do I get out of that? And they basically told me, unironically, touch grass. Like, get outside, get out of your room, stop being in your room, go to your room as little as possible, and be with your family. I had some issues with my family, but my friend was telling me, like, it doesn't matter, be with your family, be with people that you can talk to face to face, and that's what's really going to help you get out of that mentality, that addiction to being isolated. So it was really hard because, like I said, it was during the pandemic. I had issues with my family. I really didn't want to be downstairs and talking with my family. I really didn't want to, do that, but I thought I did that, and I came out of that need for isolation. And again, that need for isolation only came because I was addicted to maladaptive daydreaming, and I couldn't comfortably maladaptive daydream with other people around because that was embarrassing. So I would instead lock myself in my room and comfortably maladaptive daydream in my room. But once I left my room, once I put myself in an environment that wasn't safe to maladaptive daydream in, that's when the tide started changing, that's when the tide started turning, and I also started being more active in my community. So I talked about this before, but essentially I became a municipal liaison for NaNoWriMo, an organization that is now extinct, that is now gone, but it was an organization where you would get together every month with people, other writers in your community, and you would try to write 50,000 words in November. And essentially the municipal liaison's responsibilities was getting the group together, coming together, and having like in-person meetups to talk about this. And this was in, I think, 2023, I want to say. So pandemic restrictions were down. People were not in their homes as much, and you could go out. So that's also what helped me, was getting in public and talking to other people who I had things in common with and that I could relate to without relating to them through maladaptive daydreaming. So it wasn't, the subreddits that I was in, it wasn't the TikTok pages that I was looking at where we were relating to, I maladaptive daydream too, hee, like, when are you gonna reality shift? It was instead, like, what genre do you write? How many words have you written? Do you think you're gonna finish the 50,000 words in a month? right? And I was seeing them face to face, and I was talking to them face to face, and we were talking about real world things. And that is actually like me being a municipal liaison and me putting all my energy into writing is what also helped me remove myself from maladaptive daydreaming. Because whereas before I was maladaptive daydreaming just for my own like pleasure, I wasn't really sharing what I was imagining. Now I had to kind of put that energy somewhere. I had to put that creative energy somewhere. I had so much creative energy, so many ideas, and I had to put those ideas somewhere, so I put them in writing. The ideas were never like coherent thoughts. They were always just pieces of scenes that I had imagined, but I was the municipal liaison. I couldn't just sit there and, stare off into space and maladaptive daydream. I had to like sit there and while everybody else was typing, I also had to type away. So I was like, okay, let me go back into this world that I built for myself and let me try and build it out on paper, right? And so that is what has kind of drawn me out. Anytime that I am daydreaming, I put those scenes in my head onto paper, and then that creates that outlet for me. This is kind of in the same vein, but another thing that helped me in terms of writing my imagination out onto paper is also like before, when I was maladaptive daydreaming, I would put myself in the shoes of the main character. So I was the main character. When I realized that I had to stop maladaptive daydreaming, and when I became municipal liaison for NaNoWriMo, I could no longer be the main character because the main character now existed on paper. She was not just in my head. And so whereas before, when I was, scripting for my maladaptive daydreaming, I put so many of my own characteristics, my own wishes, my own wants, my own needs into that character. When I became municipal liaison for NaNoWriMo, and when I put that character onto paper, I removed a lot of those traits, and she kind of became her own person outside of me, not in like a tulpa way. I'll talk about that later, but in a way that's like, when you're a writer and your characters just kind of speak for themselves and have like their own voice. That's kind of what she became, is she had her own needs and her own wants, and she was no longer me. She was herself. And so that's also what helped me. So if you're struggling with maladaptive daydreaming, I do recommend taking yourself out of that character. Now that I am more grounded in reality, I am able to put traits of myself in like a variety of my characters and not feel that sense of attachment that I did before. And that has also helped me because I can say, okay, well, I have like an interest in psychology, for example. So this character is going to have an interest in psychology, but you know what? I also have an interest in dancing. So this other character, completely unrelated, is going to have an interest in dancing. And so then I can see myself in my stories without seeing myself in one singular character that makes me want to shift into a universe or unground myself. I hope that's making any lick of sense. If you have not experienced maladaptive daydreaming, that might not make as much sense to you. But yeah, I hope it makes some kind of sense regardless. And that kind of scratches the itch of wanting to daydream, but not doing it in such a way that is hurting me and not doing it in such a way that is isolating me. Because now I have a community to share with, and now I can go onto the Discord server that we're a part of, and I can, tell them, hey, like, I wrote a new scene, like, do you guys want to read it, right? And so it draws me back into reality, like, sharing my experiences with writing, doing sprints. I'm communicating with other people that are also in this reality. I am communicating with people that are doing the same things that I'm doing, while also still scratching the itch of like, well, I want to like imagine, I want my mind to fly. I want my mind to, explore this universe that is living in my head. So that's what helped me. And I personally would suggest that if you are struggling with maladaptive daydreaming, that you put that energy into creating something. And I'm not talking about putting it into chatbots. That is not what I'm talking about, because that's going to worsen your psychosis. It's going to worsen your isolation. I'm talking about you taking pen to paper and writing out exactly what you are imagining, exactly what you are thinking, and then sharing it with someone in the real world and connecting with people based off of that. Oftentimes, people who maladaptive daydream do have a lot of creative energy, so I would recommend, doing that. Maybe if you don't want to write, maybe start, download Blender and go on the Blender subreddit and try and learn how to use Blender and talk to people who are learning how to use Blender. Talk to people who know how to use Blender, right? If you don't want to create like 3D sculptures and animations, learn how to make music, maybe the music that you would listen to in that universe, and join subreddits of like Logic Pro X or whatever that software is called, and learn how to use that software and talk to people who are learning how to use that software, etc., etc. That is what I would recommend, and I would recommend talking to people face to face, because being in public is unsafe for maladaptive daydreaming, and that is what you want. You want to be in an area where you would feel uncomfortable maladaptive daydreaming, and I would recommend being in that area without your headphones. Like, take your headphones off and actually interact with people and be with people. That's what I would recommend. But anyway, here are the pros that I have found from not maladaptive daydreaming anymore. So essentially, I am currently more proud of myself right now for living the life that I'm living right now than I would have ever been if I had successfully shifted into whatever universe I wanted to shift into. And you know what the irony is that, and this was the universe having my back, like actually fully, like being so serious, is that the irony is that when I was deep in the, maladaptive daydreaming stages of my life, I could not, no matter how hard I tried, I could not shift into the reality that I wanted to shift into. But as soon as I started being happy with the life that I have here, I started dreaming of the universe that I wanted to shift into so badly. And so that, and that was all that I wanted when I was maladaptive daydreaming, is I just wanted to just have one dream where I was living in that universe. I would pray to whoever could hear me, please just let me dream once of this reality. And it never, ever, ever happened until I stopped wanting to shift into that universe, and until I became happy and content with the life that I'm living here and now, that I started dreaming of living in that universe that I wanted to shift into. And that's what I find really ironic and funny also, is that it never happened to me when I was desperate for it. And I think that was also a factor that ended up contributing to me saving myself from further isolation, is that I was never granted my wish, and that me trying to shift never happened, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how hard I prayed for it, no matter how desperate I was for it. It never ever happened until I became grounded in reality, and until because if it would have happened when I was desperate for it to happen, I would have continued trying over and over and over and over again, because then I would have seen, it's real, it does work, let me try again and again and again. Whereas when it happened, when I was content with my life and when I was, not trying to shift, it happened and I was like, oh my god, that's so cool. Anyway, let me wake up and let me go downstairs and let me eat, right? And I never, like, the dreams just kind of happen whenever they happen, and they happen particularly when I'm writing out, like, scenes or whatever. But whenever the dreams happen, I'm never like, oh, I want to try again, you know? I just wake up and I'm like, oh, I had dreamed about that universe, nice. Anyway, let me continue on with my life. I currently am still struggling with staying grounded. Not staying grounded, but not being isolated, I guess is a better way to put that. I'm struggling with not staying isolated because sometimes out of habit and for my, nervous system and my nervous system regulation, I do become overwhelmed in places where other people are at. So I tend to navigate to my room anyway whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed or overstimulated. But instead of going to my room and maladaptive daydreaming, I instead go to my room and doom scroll on TikTok. Or play The Sims, that's another. But I like to stay, in relative peace and quiet because I'm, like, after almost 2 decades, like I said, it's, like, I think a little bit over 15 years of me just maladaptive daydreaming and me consistently isolating myself just to maladaptive daydream. I'm no longer used to being in public. I'm no longer used to being around other people. And so I do have to kind of force myself to do that, force myself to be in public and force myself to kind of push through, force myself to talk to other people. I have to consistently remind myself, like, you have to be in public, you have to stay grounded in reality, you have to stay grounded in what is happening right now. So the way that I've been able to stay in this reality is being more proud of the progress that I have made here than I ever would have been shifting, right? I would have been proud of myself for shifting and, like, for finally accomplishing that, but I came to realize that it's not, me being proud of myself for shifting would not have been as big as me being proud of myself for, like, for example, taking my first solo trip and successfully, returning and successfully doing that. I was so proud of myself when I did my first solo trip ever that I cried. I was so happy that I was able to do that and so grateful that I was able to do that. And that particular moment in time when I started just sobbing was confirmation that I was going down the right path, right? Because sometimes when you're addicted to something that you shouldn't be addicted to, you feel happier when you're in that addiction, if that makes sense. Like, you feel happier and then you get out of that, and sometimes you have really bad days, sometimes you have really good days, but on your really bad days, you start to feel like, oh, this was a mistake, I should have never stopped that, like, addictive thing that I was doing, I should have never recovered from my addiction, I should have never stopped doing that addiction, whatever that addiction might be, I should have never stopped doing that. But when I successfully took my first solo trip and started crying in pride, started crying in gratitude, it cemented to me that I was doing the right thing and that I was heading down the right path. No more maladaptive daydreaming for me, because maladaptive daydreaming would never have gotten me to my first solo trip, okay? You understand what I'm saying? So that's what I was really happy about, and so that's what I want you guys to take away from that. If you are struggling with maladaptive daydreaming, is I want you to take away that your success in this reality, like hard-earned success in this reality, is gonna make it worth it when you stop maladaptive daydreaming. Like, it'll feel so much better than you accomplishing anything in your scripted universe where you had to write out your successes. And this is, by the way, not me hating on manifestation rituals, because a lot of the times manifestation rituals can look a lot like scripting, because, like I said, reality shifting was originally a form of manifestation and a form of kind of seeing what you could accomplish, seeing your potential, meditating through that, etc., etc. So the scripting comes from that manifestation ritual side of reality shifting, what reality shifting was originally meant to be. But essentially my point is that manifestation works with your life, whereas pop culture reality shifting works against your life. So yeah, not to hate on manifestation, but I am hating on maladaptive daydreaming. Okay, I will now read you guys this Reddit story that I found that I think perfectly encapsulates all that I've been kind of talking about and is a really good warning for those of you who are maladaptive daydreaming. This is 3 posts long. The first post was posted October 3rd, 2014, the second post May 16th, 2020, and the third post September 22nd, 2020. So for at least 6 years, this guy has been struggling with maladaptive daydreaming. So the first post is titled, "Today I fucked up by admitting to my girlfriend that I pretend she is a giant cockroach when we have sex. Ever since I was a teenager, I have had very intense fantasies about having sex with a giant roach. It started in 9th or 10th grade when we read The Metamorphoses by Franz Kafka. As I started to think more and more about the roach creature that the character had become, I started to imagine what it would be like if a woman turned into the roach instead. I found this idea very arousing. I would not be repulsed or frightened of her as the characters in the story are. I would take care of her. Then my thoughts started to get sexual with the character. Eventually, I sort of dropped the bit about her having been a human woman first, and I kind of imagined this fictionalized roach species. They are giant roaches, the size of a person, and have complete intelligence. I kind of over time conjured up an imaginary friend of sorts. She was one of these roaches, and her name was Ogtha. I would fantasize about her often. Whenever I masturbated, I'd be imagining elaborate scenarios of me and Ogtha making love. When I started to have actual sex, I found I could not perform if I wasn't thinking of Ogtha. So basically now, anytime I have sex with a woman, I am pretending that she is actually Ogtha. Not just think about Ogtha, I concentrate intently to visualize that I actually am doing Ogtha. I don't want to think about the girl at all. There is only Ogtha. Of course, this sex can never be as exciting as my fully imaginary sessions with Ogtha. There are things that her multiple appendages and antennae allow for that a human woman can never match. So anyways, I've been in a relationship with my girlfriend for about a year. 3 or 4 times I have tried to have sex with her and not pretend she is Ogtha, but I just can't do it. So essentially, every time we have sex, I am imagining she is Ogtha. I finally confided this to her the other day, and I was blown away by her reaction. I thought she might take it a bit badly at first, but that she'd get used to it. No, I have never seen such a look of disgust before. Outraged is not an understatement. She is not even returning my texts now. I am afraid she is actually going to break up with me, and also that is going to tell people about Ogtha. I don't know how I will face anyone. This is going to sound silly, but I also feel guilty about feeling shame, as if Ogtha will be saddened by this, even though I know she is imaginary. I just don't know what to do at this point. The second post that he made about this is titled, "Today I fucked up by admitting to my coworkers that my wife Ogtha is an imaginary giant roach." And so he writes, "The gist of the backstory is that ever since I was a teenager, I have fantasized in my head of making love to a giant roach, a roach the size of a person. Eventually, I concocted an entire backstory and personality for this imaginary roach, who I named Ogtha. Whenever I would engage in private, pleasurable deeds, if you know what I mean, I would imagine in my head vivid and elaborate scenarios with Ogtha. It got to be I could not perform with an actual partner unless I pretended they were Ogtha. You might think of the scene in Blade Runner 2049, which my original Today I Fucked Up predates, by the way, where the main character makes love to a prostitute, but his hologram girlfriend kind of holograms over the body of the actual person, so he can pretend he is making love to his hologram. That is what it was like with me and Ogtha, but instead of a hologram, it was just my imagination. In the 5 years that have passed since this topic was posted, I decided to stop fooling myself, and I just committed to the love of Agtha. I know she is not real per se, but in my head she is an actual personality, and I am in love with that personality. I don't care if she is a roach or if she is imaginary. The love is real. Call me deluded, but it's harmless. It makes me happy. I have not had a real girlfriend again since that incident 5 years ago, but occasionally I have had one-night stands via online apps, with the understanding of it being one night in advance. And on these times, I always envision the woman is Agtha, my sensual roach queen. Now, I mean no offense to the women, of course, and even a gentleman once or twice. The many appendages of Agtha make translation to human gender almost irrelevant. I just envision they are Agtha. And no, haha, I have never confided to them about it. I learned my lesson. The thing about it, though, is that I became so in love with my Agtha that I married her. I even did a little ceremony in my living room. I recited my own vows, and she recited hers. I even went on a honeymoon, which technically you could say was a solo vacation to New Orleans for a week. But in my mind, Agtha was with me the entire time. In my mind, I think of her as my wife. Now here's where I fucked up. I got so used to thinking of her as my wife in my head that a few months ago at work, I nonchalantly said my wife in some innocuous sentence. I think it was something like, "Oh yeah, me and my wife love that show," in regards to Chopped. So now everyone was asking me about my wife, because they had never heard I was married or even dating anyone. Everyone kept pestering me, wanting to know about her, wanting to see pictures. I became full of panic. I did the one thing I swore I would never do again. I talked to the other people about Agtha in real life. We were at a team lunch and I just let it all spill out. I told them about how I became enamored as a teenager with the Franz Kafka story, how my fantasy evolved into an actual imaginary entity with a personality, and how I slowly began to grow in love with her. What started as a mere sexual attraction to a giant roach blossomed into a whirlwind romance, and that she became the love of my life, even though her existence was in my own mind. At first, they thought I was doing a creepy joke, but I convinced them I was telling the truth. Well, they were afraid and disgusted. I have been a pariah at work ever since. Everybody steers clear of me. We used to have a good social life. Now people only speak to me for work-related reasons. Even working virtually now, nobody sends me a Slack message unless it is about work. I even heard a rumor that some people went to HR, but they were, of course, told nothing could be done. I have lost my good work friends because of this, and it is indeed jeopardizing my career because my bosses think I am insane. I have ruined my friendships and future career prospects due to my honesty. I'm starting to look for a new job, although it is difficult in the current environment. I can start fresh elsewhere though. No matter what, I will be staying with my wife Agtha. For me, it is Agtha forever. If you must know, I do hope that even if I am an old man, that one day the technology is invented to extract the Agtha personality from my mind and implant it into a real external body, either of a genetically engineered or a mechanical nature, and me and Agtha can then experience genuine physical connection. But if she must remain within me, that is fine. Her love keeps me warm on the coldest of nights. Thank you. The third post is titled, "Today I fucked up by telling my parents that I am married to an imaginary giant roach." A few of you may recall some years ago, I posted about my lovely Agtha. My new story requires an explanation of Agtha for those who don't know. I will try to be brief. Basically, many years ago, as a teenager, I became fascinated with the Kafka story, The Metamorphosis, and I began to fantasize about a character like that, but a woman, essentially a giant roach. I found this very erotic. As time went on, the character became a member of a fictional roach species, basically giant intelligent roaches, and this one specifically was Agtha. For several years, Agtha was just an imaginary figure to me, but as time went on, she became a fully sentient being that I fell in love with. Agtha, to me, is a real creature. She simply lacks a physical body in our world, and her consciousness resides in my mind alongside my own. The users of a subreddit helped me realize there is nothing delusional about this, and that indeed it is very possible for such entities to come into being. I do hope that one day the technology will exist to extract Agtha from my mind and install her into an artificial physical body, but we are satisfied with our current relationship. I love Agtha and she loves me. Some time ago, I married her. Now, from a strictly legal sense, no, I am not married per se, but for me and Agtha, we consider our relationship to be a marriage. I am devoted to her and her to me. I revealed this to my coworkers and it did not go well, but I thought my parents had a right to know. Last evening, I revealed to them everything about Agtha and told them we were married. I even allowed Agtha to speak through me to them, so that she could finally meet my parents after only seeing them from afar. I knew my parents would find it unusual at first, but I thought they would come to understand and be happy for me. However, I fear they think me deranged. My mother actually cried, and not tears of happiness as I expected. They even encouraged me to seek counseling. I explained to them that what I am experiencing is real and encouraged them to read through the Tulpa Reddit. God, I have to explain tulpas now. It has created a very bad situation for me, and now I fear my relationship with my parents is quite ruined. They keep insisting I seek counseling and are threatening if I don't, they will no longer assist with my student loans and will not be welcome at Thanksgiving. I feel they are overreacting, but at the same time, I wish I had just kept my marriage a secret. I do consider it now to be a fuck up to have been truthful with my parents. They are in some ways traditionalists and are simply not ready to understand how entities can exist without physical form and share a mind. It breaks my heart, but I wish I had been deceitful with my family. For the record, I will never divorce Agtha, and with our love, I know I can survive anything, but I wish I had never been truthful with my parents. The saddest part to me about this story is that he is telling people about Agtha despite it always going wrong because he feels guilty if he doesn't. And he feels guilty for not telling people about Agtha because he has spent over half of his life now daydreaming about this Agtha personality being real. And he has fully convinced himself that Agtha exists, whether he believes that she exists in this plane of existence, whether he believes that she exists in another plane of existence. He fully 100% believes that Agtha exists, and therefore is doing her a disservice by not talking about her, which is why when his coworkers asked about Agtha, he couldn't just come up with a lie and say, oh yeah, my wife and I have been married for X amount of years, we met in X place. He instead had to tell them the truth about how Agtha came to be. It's why he, in his third post, said, I know my coworkers reacted badly to this, but I felt my parents had the right to know. It's why he said that he felt guilty for feeling shame when he told his ex-girlfriend about Agtha, or about the fact that he visualizes her as a cockroach when they're having sex. It's because he has been so wrapped up in his delusion and his maladaptive daydreaming that he feels convinced that Agtha is real and has real feelings outside of himself, and that is an independent emotional being with a consciousness outside of himself. That's essentially what a tulpa is. I'll get into it later. And that's why he keeps telling people about Agtha. That's why he told his coworkers about Agtha, because even though he did not plan on telling his coworkers that he was married, even though he never talked about being in a relationship or being married or dating or anything of the sort, when he did reveal that to his coworkers, he felt too guilty to keep hiding it, if that makes sense. Like, he felt like, okay, well, now that people know that I'm married, I can't lie about Ogtha because then Ogtha would feel bad. And he did that because the Tulpa subreddit convinced him that Ogtha is real, number one, and number two, even if he hadn't found the Tulpa subreddit, he still would feel like Ogtha is a human being with emotions and consciousness outside of himself, like with independent thinking, independent beliefs outside of himself. He fully believes that Ogtha is not just within him, but is trapped inside of him, which I think is the saddest part, and also why he confidently said that he thought his mom would be crying tears of joy instead of tears of fear. And I just want this story, regardless of whether you guys may believe it to be true or not, I personally believe this is true, just because it has been going on for so long, and the OP describes maladaptive daydreaming so well that he must be going through it, or he at least is writing a story inspired by what he went through. I think for the most part it is real, but regardless of whether you guys believe it is real or not, I think it is a good story to remind you guys that maladaptive daydreaming can be dangerous, and it can lead you down this exact path if you fully convince yourself, which is very easy to do when you're isolated and when you're depressed and lonely, that your maladaptive daydreaming is real and deserves to have a space within the reality that you are currently living in, or even a space within another reality, a space within another reality where you want to travel to. That can be exceptionally dangerous, and I highly caution you guys against delving deeper into maladaptive daydreaming. So tulpas, I was not expecting to have to explain what a tulpa is. A tulpa is basically, it's an imaginary friend, but it's more than an imaginary friend. So remember what I said about reality shifting, that basically every universe is real, like every possible existence is existing. We just don't know how to understand it because, multiverse, etc., etc. Tulpas basically derive from that same kind of thinking, that same kind of line of thinking, that every fictional piece of media is real in some universe, like in another universe, the Marvel universe is real, right? Tulpas is the same thing. It's just not a fictional universe, it's just an imaginary friend. So the idea is that you can imagine an imaginary friend, and that imaginary friend is real someplace in our complicated understanding of the universe. But anyway, that story, again, like I said, whether it's true or not is kind of irrelevant, because that kind of thing happens to a lot of people. A lot of people maladaptive daydreaming starts in typically teenagehood, and it transforms and it devolves into isolation, into further isolation. And I think this Ogtha story is a very good example of what can happen if you let your maladaptive daydreaming control you. And again, whether or not it actually happened to OP, whether or not OP is creative writing, it still is a good story to keep in mind if you are somebody to maladaptive daydreams, and it's a good story to keep in mind of how you should really fight to get out of the maladaptive daydreaming. You really should. It'll be the best thing you've ever done for yourself. As painful as this existence can be, which I know is also another reason why people maladaptive daydream, is because existence in this reality is very painful. But as painful as existence in this reality can be, you will be a lot more proud of yourself if you accomplish things in this painful existence, rather than if you were to script accomplishments in an existence where there is no pain, right? You know what they say, no pain, no gain. And that's also what helped me get out of maladaptive daydreaming, is the idea that I couldn't be proud of my accomplishments in a universe where I pre-made my accomplishments, right? So yeah, I decided to instead put the energy in this universe, right? Instead of trying to shift into a universe where I was good at dancing and where I was, this was never part of my imagination, but like, let's say a world-renowned choreographer or something. I instead, in this reality, signed up for hip-hop classes, right? That's not actually why I signed up for hip-hop classes. I actually signed up because I wanted to relearn how to dance. And it also, I ended up talking to people and making friends. But yeah, that's essentially what I'm trying to say, is if you are scripting, I want to shift into a universe where I am a world-renowned choreographer and I am recognized for my achievements. Try and sign up for a dance class in this universe, and you're gonna feel more proud of yourself going through the dance class in this universe. Whether or not you become a world-renowned choreographer, you will feel more proud of going through the dance class than you would feel if you were to shift successfully into a universe where you are already a world-renowned choreographer, if that makes sense. I hope you understand what I'm saying, and I hope my words reach you, because maladaptive daydreaming, it sounds whimsical, it sounds harmless, but it's not harmless. It's not harmless, and it can lead to severe mental illness. It can lead to the worsening of your mental illnesses, and it can lead to even more isolation. And it does become a self-fulfilling prophecy. It does. You start because you feel isolated and lonely, but the more that you isolate yourself to maladaptive daydream, the more lonely you become. And the more that you have to rely on maladaptive daydreaming, which is it's not good. Don't do that. So yeah, that is all that I have for you guys today. I hope this made sense. It is an hour and 30 minutes long. I'm going to edit it down. There's a lot of things that I don't want to include because, like I said, I don't like sharing my personal stuff on this podcast, so I'm going to cut down a bunch of that stuff. But I hope my words still reach you, and I hope whenever you maladaptive daydream, you think of the Octa story and you realize that could be you. Again, maybe not to that extent, but it could be you. It could be you being isolated even more and falling even further down an endless rabbit hole of isolation. And I do not want that for you, so remove yourself from that isolation and talk to people in real life, and talking to people in real life is a skill that you're gonna need anyway, so start practicing it now. Start talking to people in real life now, and feel proud of yourself for doing that. Anyway, so that is all that I have for you guys today. Let me know what you think of this episode, and check out the links in the description if you want to learn more about maladaptive daydreaming. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next episode, which will be about antinatalism. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, thank you for watching or listening, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.